The question is that the document be noted, and I call the member for Durack.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to speak on the 2016 Closing the Gap report and pay my respect to all Indigenous Australians past and present. I firstly would like to commend the contributions of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition yesterday regarding this report. I take this opportunity, Deputy Speaker, to place on record that while I applaud the inroads that we have made in the last 12 months, and there have been some, of course, more still needs to be done. Pleasingly, the Prime Minister said yesterday that this government will honour the commitment of not delivering to Indigenous Australians, but rather working with Indigenous Australians and their communities across Australia. Deputy Speaker, my electorate of Durack has the third highest amount of Indigenous Australians per electorate in the country, with at least 28,870 Indigenous Australians calling Durack home, making up over 16% of my electorate, according to the 2011 census. Health, education, employment and economic development are often the four most significant areas for any individual, and I'm pleased to say that there has been improved outcomes in the report in those areas in the last 12 months. Deputy Speaker, this illustrates that partnerships created and sustained by the Turnbull government with businesses and individuals is starting to pay dividends, but progress is too slow. Success in these areas also illustrates effective engagement with Indigenous Australians, but we all know, Deputy Speaker, that we can do better. One of the targets I'm most pleased about is that we're on track to halve the gap in Indigenous child mortality by 2018. This year's report has found that Indigenous infant mortality has more than halved in the last 16 years. And this, Deputy Speaker, is positive news. But as I said at the outset, more still needs to be done. But the fact that Indigenous child mortality has more than halved in the last 16 years is something that we and previous governments, together with Aboriginal leaders, should be proud of. Today, more Indigenous children are immunised by the age of 5 than non-Indigenous children, with 92.8% of Indigenous children being immunised, some 1.1% higher than non-Indigenous children. But, Deputy Speaker, we know the best start in life comes from quality pre- and postnatal care, parent and family programs and support for vulnerable children. And I'm pleased to say this government has invested some $94 million over 3 years from 2015-16 on the Better Start to Life approach, which increases access to child and maternal health activities. Deputy Speaker, this funding is particularly important in the rural and remote electorate of Durack, which boasts over 300 towns and communities where availability of these services has improved. This year's report also found that halving the gap in Year 12 attainment by 2020 is on track. As members of both sides of this chamber will know that I am a fierce advocate for improved education, but particularly in the bush. As Nelson Mandela famously said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Retention rates for Indigenous students to Year 12 are at 60%, up from 32% in the late 1990s. So it's an improvement, but we must work harder to ensure that all Aboriginal youth complete their education. It is critical. The Indigenous Advancement Strategy Children and Schooling Program is supporting a number of programs, Deputy Speaker, including mentoring activities, intensive school-based activities, scholarships and mobility projects. Deputy Speaker, we are not on track to halve the gap in employment by 2018. There has been a long-term improvement in this area, with Indigenous employment up by a paltry 10% from 1994 to 2012 and 13. And I think, Deputy Speaker, this just highlights once again how critical the education is of young Indigenous people. However, there is some good news beneath the surface and is not reflected in the Closing of the Gap report, and I'm pleased to say there are almost 50 jobs a day being created for Indigenous people through our employment programs. Additionally, this government has committed real action in this area, with the government having awarded contracts to Indigenous businesses worth around $40 million so far this financial year alone, some 6 times the value of only a couple of years ago. Deputy Speaker, I'm particularly pleased to see the life expectancy gap close more than any other target. I believe the government's $3.3 billion for the next 4 years Indigenous Australians Health Program will contribute to improving the life expectancy gap, as will the implementation plan for the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Plan 2013-2023, which is underpinned by the collaboration across governments, health sectors and Indigenous Australians. Good eyesight, good hearing, improving diabetes, these are just some of the health issues we must focus on. Deputy Speaker, I'm glad to say that locally in Durack, I have some fantastic programs and initiatives which are playing their role in closing the gap. Aiming to support, educate and empower young people with the life skills and tools to ensure their future is in their hands, the organisation called Shine plays a vital role in retaining students, non-Indigenous girls as well, at secondary school in my largest city in Geraldton. Shine runs its program in an innovative hairdressing salon environment. Established at John Wilcox College in Geraldton, Shine was established in 2010 and over 200 students have been through the program, led by the very enthusiastic, excitable, dedicated, inspirational founder Mandy Jolly, retaining and engaging students who might not otherwise have continued their schooling education. Now, I just want to make the point this is a program for young girls, and this is why it is so innovative. And of course, we've heard about other wonderful programs around Australia, but it's certainly something I'm focused on in the seat of Durack. This is a fabulous initiative, Deputy Speaker, which ensures more Indigenous young girls continue through high school and provides them with practical pathways to continue their education. Very pleasingly, Deputy Speaker, with an Indigenous Advancement Strategy funding from the federal government, Shine has been able to expand its program to Geraldton Senior College for the oldest female students, and I managed to get a sneak preview yesterday of what the new salon environment looks like, and it's very impressive. Aiding to support improved health for Indigenous people is also the work by mental health worker Glenn Fleeton. Mr Fleeton has done a sterling job looking after the rural towns in the Midwest through his very effective programs. I might say, Deputy Speaker, with minimal financial assistance. Includes organising sport in rural towns like Mount Magnet, Yalgoo, Mingenew, Moruwa and Peringeri. He also tailors programs for farmers, getting them to take their mind off their troubles for the day and playing sport amongst other town locals. These are just a few activities that Mr Fleeton runs, which go a long way to bridging the gap for Indigenous Australians, but more importantly, bringing Australian Indigenous and non-Indigenous people together. Well done, Glenn Fleeton. Mr Deputy Speaker, as you can see, people in Durack are highly innovative and are using their creative and bright minds to creating headway in my electorate of Durack. I would now like to conclude my comments here today, Deputy Speaker, and I just wanted to finish off where I started, and that is that there has been some success in closing the gap. However, more needs to be done, and I think there wouldn't be one member in Parliament who would not agree with that statement. But only the Turnbull government can truly deliver a better way forward for Indigenous Australians. But I must say, Deputy Speaker, that only by working with Indigenous Australians will we actually achieve closing the gap.
I thank the member for Durack.